The night sky over Basra hung thick with heat and diesel smoke when the call came through to Camp Slayer. British Special Air Service operators had been pinned down for nearly 4 hours in a crumbling compound on the eastern edge of the city, their exfiltration plan shredded by unexpected enemy reinforcements. What began as a straightforward intelligence-gathering mission had spiraled into a desperate holding action, and London was quietly scrambling for options. The Americans listened to the crackling radio traffic with the practiced patience of professionals who had seen this movie before. Delta Force, stationed less than 30 kilometers away, received the distress signal at 2200 hours local time. Within 11 minutes, 2 MH-6 Little Birds were airborne, rotors cutting through the Iraqi darkness like surgical instruments. The British team had entered the target building at 1930, expecting to photograph documents and interrogate a mid-level Ba'athist intelligence officer who allegedly possessed information about insurgent supply networks. Intelligence suggested the compound would be lightly defended, perhaps 3 or 4 guards at most. What the SAS found instead was a hornet's nest. Somewhere between the planning room in Kuwait and the dusty streets of Basra, the operational picture had shifted. The target had moved his security apparatus into high gear, flooding the compound with nearly 24 armed men, many of them veterans of Saddam's Republican Guard, who knew how to fight in urban terrain. The British operators, numbering just 6, suddenly found themselves outnumbered and outgunned in a structure they had not adequately reconnoitered. By 2100 hours, the SAS team had withdrawn to the upper floor of the compound, barricading themselves in what appeared to be a former administrative office. Ammunition was running low. One operator had taken a round through the shoulder, another had shrapnel wounds from a poorly aimed rocket-propelled grenade that had detonated against the exterior wall. Radio communications with their quick reaction force were sporadic at best, compromised by the maze of concrete and rebar that formed the bones of Iraqi urban architecture. The British command structure, bound by layers of coordination protocols and political sensitivities, hesitated. Sending in a ground convoy would take too long and risk a broader firefight that could inflame an already volatile city. Airstrikes were out of the question in such a densely populated area. Someone had to move, and move fast. But the machinery of coalition warfare grinds slowly when national pride and diplomatic niceties enter the equation. Delta Force does not wait for permission slips. The unit's commander, a compact Texan with 23 years of experience in places most people could not find on a map, made the decision in less than 90 seconds. 2 assault teams, 12 operators total, would insert directly onto the compound roof via fast rope from the Little Birds. A ground element with armored vehicles would establish a cordon 2 blocks out, ready to suppress any attempts at reinforcement. There would be no lengthy briefings, no PowerPoint presentations, no circling back with higher headquarters. The mission clock started the moment those helicopters lifted off, and every man aboard understood that speed and violence of action would determine whether 6 British operators went home in body bags or walked out under their own power. The flight to the target took less than 8 minutes. Delta's pilots, some of the most skilled rotary wing aviators in the world, flew nap of the earth, skimming rooftops and power lines with a confidence that bordered on reckless to anyone who did not understand the thousands of hours of training behind each maneuver. The Little Birds came in dark, navigation lights extinguished, relying on night vision and GPS coordinates updated in real time by a Predator drone loitering at 12,000 feet. The enemy fighters surrounding the compound had no idea what was about to hit them. They were focused on the stairs, expecting the British to attempt a desperate breakout or simply waiting for exhaustion and ammunition depletion to force a surrender. No one was watching the sky. The helicopters flared over the compound at 23:14 hours, and 12 operators fast roped onto the roof in less than 15 seconds. The insertion was textbook, executed with the kind of mechanical precision that comes only from endless repetition. Delta trains for scenarios exactly like this, drilling the same movements until they become muscle memory, until conscious thought is no longer required. The moment boots hit concrete, the assault element split into two teams. Alpha moved to secure the stairwell access, bracing for the inevitable counterattack from below. Bravo began cutting through the roof to create an alternate entry point into the room where the SAS team was holed up. There was no hesitation, no confusion, no radio chatter beyond the essential minimum. Each operator knew his role, knew his sector, knew what had to happen next. Below, the enemy fighters heard the helicopters but could not immediately process what was happening. Some ran outside, firing wildly into the air with AK-47s, their muzzle flashes bright against the darkness, but utterly ineffective against fast-moving aircraft already climbing back to altitude. Others crowded the stairwell, screaming at each other in Arabic, trying to organize a response to a threat they did not yet understand. That confusion bought Delta precious seconds. Alpha Team's breacher placed a small-shaped charge on the roof access door, stepped back, and detonated. The explosion was sharp and controlled, blowing the door inward and sending a concussive wave down the stairwell that momentarily stunned anyone within 10 meters. Before the smoke cleared, two operators were through the opening, firing controlled bursts into the mass of bodies trying to scramble up the stairs. The firefight that erupted was brief and catastrophically one-sided. Delta operators train with live ammunition more in a single month than most military units fire in a year. Their weapon handling is not just proficient, it is an art form refined to lethal perfection. Each man carried a suppressed M4 carbine equipped with advanced optics and infrared lasers visible only through night vision goggles. The enemy fighters, stumbling in the dark with iron-sided Kalashnikovs, never stood a chance. Delta methodically cleared the stairwell, firing in disciplined pairs, one operator engaging while his partner reloaded or scanned for secondary threats. Bodies began piling up in the narrow corridor. The speed of the violence was overwhelming. In less than 2 minutes, the route from the roof to the second floor was secure, littered with expended brass and the sprawled forms of men who had made the fatal mistake of standing between Delta Force and their objective. Bravo Team, meanwhile, had cut a precise rectangular hole in the roof and established communication with the trapped SAS operators below. The British, hearing American accents over the chaos, felt a complex mix of relief and something harder to define. Pride stings when rescue comes from unexpected quarters, especially when your service carries a reputation built over decades of operations from Malaya to the Falklands. But professionalism trumped ego. The SAS team leader, a grizzled Scotsman with tours in Northern Ireland and Sierra Leone, quickly briefed the Delta operator who dropped through the roof opening. 2 wounded, ammunition nearly gone, enemy attempting to place explosives at the barricaded door. The American nodded, spoke a few terse words into his radio, and the machinery of extraction shifted into high gear. Delta's medic went to work immediately on the wounded British operators. He carried trauma supplies that represented the cutting edge of battlefield medicine, equipment purchased without the budget constraints that hamstring most military units. Hemostatic gauze, chest seals, rapid infusion systems, tools designed to keep a man alive long enough to reach surgical facilities. The medic worked with calm efficiency, his hands steady despite the sporadic gunfire still echoing from the stairwell. He had done this before, in Mogadishu, in Kabul, in a dozen nameless compounds across the Middle East. Treating gunshot wounds under fire was not a crisis for him. It was Tuesday night. Outside the compound, Delta's ground element had arrived and established a perimeter that looked less like a cordon and more like a steel trap. 4 armored Humvees, each mounting a .50 caliber machine gun or Mark 19 automatic grenade launcher, blocked the approaches to the compound. When several pickup trucks loaded with armed men attempted to reinforce the fighters inside, They were met with a wall of fire that shredded metal and flesh with industrial efficiency. The vehicles burned in the street, black smoke rising into the night sky, a clear message to anyone else considering intervention. Delta does not negotiate, it dictates terms. The message was received. No further reinforcements attempted to reach the compound. Inside, the extraction sequence was underway. The SAS team, now reinforced by Delta operators, prepared to move. The wounded were secured to lightweight litters that could be hauled up through the roof opening. The plan was simple. Everyone goes up. Everyone gets on the helicopters. Anyone who tries to stop that gets shot. Complexity is the enemy of successful operations, especially when time and ammunition are limited resources. Delta's team leader checked his watch. 27 minutes since insertion. They had been on target too long. In this kind of environment, every additional minute increased the risk of organized resistance or, worse, political complications that could turn a successful rescue into an international incident. The little birds returned, engines howling as they descended toward the compound roof. The pilots held steady hovers in conditions that would make civilian aviators break into cold sweats. Zero illumination, surrounded by buildings, taking sporadic small arms fire from unknown positions. But these were not civilian aviators. These were the Night Stalkers of the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, men who flew Delta and SEAL teams into the worst places on Earth and brought them home again. The helicopters' miniguns traversed slowly, gunners scanning for threats, ready to pour thousands of rounds per minute into anything that moved with hostile intent. The wounded SAS operators went up first, winched through the roof opening, and loaded onto the first little bird. The rest of the British team followed, each man professionally aware that he was being saved from a situation that should never have developed in the first place. There would be debriefs, after-action reviews, pointed questions about how a simple intelligence grab had turned into a near disaster. But that was for later. Right now, survival trumped pride. The Delta operators moved last, maintaining security until the final man was on the roof and ready to board. As the helicopters lifted off, one operator placed a thermite grenade on the roof access point, denying the enemy any easy route to follow. The grenade ignited with white-hot fury, melting steel and concrete, leaving a smoking scar that would remain visible for weeks. The flight back to Camp Slayer was quiet. The SAS operators sat in silence, processing what had just happened. They were elite soldiers, men who had passed one of the most grueling selection courses in the world, operators who had executed missions across multiple continents. Yet they had needed rescue, and that rescue had come not from their own chain of command, but from an American unit that had arrived, solved the problem, and would probably never mention it again. Delta Force does not issue press releases. There would be no CNN coverage, no medal ceremony, no public acknowledgement of what had transpired in Basra that night. The operation would be recorded in classified after-action reports, filed away in archives that would remain sealed for decades. The broader implications of the mission became apparent in the days that followed. British commanders quietly acknowledged that their operational planning had failed to account for rapidly changing ground conditions. Intelligence assessments had been outdated, assumptions about enemy strength had been dangerously optimistic, and coordination between coalition partners had been inadequate. These were not accusations. They were facts, uncomfortable facts that exposed gaps in the vaunted British Special Operations apparatus. Delta Force, by contrast, had demonstrated a level of readiness and capability that seemed to exist in a different category altogether. They had received a distress call and responded with overwhelming force in under 12 minutes. They had inserted into a hostile compound, cleared multiple enemy positions, extracted 6 friendly operators and 2 wounded, and disappeared back into the night before most conventional units could have even reached the briefing room. The technological gap was perhaps the most striking element. Delta operators carried night vision devices that turned darkness into daylight, communications equipment that allowed seamless coordination between air and ground elements, and weapon systems that provided accuracy and suppression capabilities far beyond standard military issue. This was not just a matter of having better gear. It was a systemic advantage built on decades of prioritization and unlimited access to defense budgets. When Delta needed a new piece of equipment, they got it. When they needed specialized training, they received it. There were no procurement delays, no bureaucratic runarounds, no cost-benefit analyses that stretched on for months. The unit existed in a special category, funded and equipped to operate at the absolute cutting edge of military capability. British Special Forces, for all their historical prestige and undeniable skill, operated under constraints that Delta simply did not face. Budget limitations meant older equipment stayed in service longer. Political oversight meant mission approval could be delayed, while decision-makers consulted and coordinated. Force structure meant fewer operators available for contingency responses. These were not failings. They were realities of operating within a framework that balanced military effectiveness against financial constraints and democratic accountability. Delta Force, shielded by layers of classification and supported by the vast resources of the American defense establishment, played by different rules. They were the surgical instrument that appeared when other tools had failed, the option of last resort that arrived with helicopter gunships and unlimited authority to use lethal force. The Basra operation became a case study, though not one that circulated widely. Within the special operations community, word spread quietly about what had happened that night. The SAS had been caught out, Delta had pulled them from the fire, and the mission had succeeded despite everything. There was no gloating from the American side, no triumphalism or mocking commentary. Professional respect remained intact. But the underlying message was clear. When the stakes are highest and the margin for error thinnest, there is a reason the United States maintains units like Delta Force. They are not just elite. They represent a concentration of resources, training, and experience that few other nations can match or even approximate. The operators themselves rarely discuss the mission. In the tight-knit world of special operations, reputation matters more than publicity. Delta had done what it was designed to do: respond to a crisis, apply overwhelming violence with precision, and extract before the situation deteriorated further. There was no need to advertise. The people who needed to know already knew. The SAS operators who walked away from that compound alive knew. The British command structure that authorized the call for assistance knew. The Iraqi insurgents who lost more than 20 fighters in less than 30 minutes knew. The message had been delivered without a single word being spoken to the press or the public. In the broader context of coalition operations in Iraq, the Basra incident highlighted the complex dynamics of multinational military cooperation. On paper, Allied Special Forces units train together, share intelligence, and coordinate operations with smooth efficiency. In reality, national pride, differing operational doctrines, and varying levels of resources create friction that can turn deadly when plans go wrong. The British had designed their mission based on the capabilities and limitations of their own force structure. When the situation exceeded those parameters, they found themselves in a hole with limited options for climbing out. Delta Force represented the American solution to that problem, an overwhelming application of capability that crushed resistance through sheer superiority in every measurable category. The enemy fighters who survived the engagement told their own stories in the days that followed. In the fluid world of Iraqi insurgent networks, word spread quickly about the compound raid. The accounts varied wildly, colored by fear and confusion, but certain elements remained consistent. The attackers had come from the sky, moved with inhuman speed, and killed with mechanical efficiency. They wore strange equipment that glowed in the darkness, spoke in calm voices even during intense firefights, and vanished as suddenly as they had appeared. Some of the stories took on mythical qualities, describing soldiers who could not be killed, who could see through walls, who moved like ghosts through solid matter. This was psychological warfare at its most effective, not through deliberate propaganda, but through the simple demonstration of overwhelming tactical superiority. For the American military establishment, the Basra rescue reinforced existing beliefs about the value of elite special operations units. Delta Force cost enormous amounts of money to maintain. Each operator represented years of training, millions of dollars in equipment, and specialized support infrastructure that included dedicated aviation assets, intelligence analysts, and logistics networks. Critics occasionally questioned whether such expenditures were justified, whether the same resources distributed across conventional forces might provide better overall combat effectiveness. Basra provided a counterargument. When 6 Allied operators were trapped in a deteriorating tactical situation, conventional forces were not the answer. Heavy armor could not navigate the narrow streets quickly enough. Infantry units lacked the specialized training for close-quarters battle in urban terrain. Air power risked massive collateral damage in a populated area. Delta Force solved the problem in 27 minutes with 0 friendly casualties and minimal ammunition expenditure. The psychological impact on the SAS operators was harder to quantify. They were men who had built careers on being the best, on handling impossible situations with limited resources and maximum aggression. Finding themselves on the receiving end of a rescue operation challenged fundamental aspects of their professional identity. Some processed it as a learning experience, studying what Delta had done and how they had done it, looking for tactical lessons that could be integrated into British doctrine. Others felt a sharper edge of resentment, a sense that their own command structure had failed them by sending them into a situation without adequate support or intelligence. All of them, regardless of individual reactions, understood that they had witnessed something significant, a glimpse of what American Special Operations Forces could accomplish when unleashed without constraints. The compound itself remained a smoking ruin for weeks after the raid. Iraqi civilians who lived in the neighborhood spoke in whispers about the night the Americans came. Some claimed to have seen helicopters that made no sound, soldiers who appeared and disappeared like jinn, weapons that killed without noise or flash. The reality, while less supernatural, was impressive enough. Delta had executed a complex combat operation in urban terrain at night, achieved all objectives, and extracted without losing a single friendly operator. The tactical proficiency required for such an operation was extraordinary, representing the culmination of training systems and selection processes refined over decades. British military leadership quietly absorbed the lessons from Basra. New protocols were developed for intelligence verification before mission approval. Coordination procedures with American Special Operations Forces were streamlined, establishing clearer channels for requesting assistance in extremis. Equipment procurement received renewed attention, with particular focus on night vision capabilities and secure communication systems. These were incremental improvements, adjustments at the margins, rather than wholesale revolutions. The fundamental constraints remained: budget, politics, force structure, but the Basra incident provided ammunition for advocates pushing for better resources and more operational flexibility. Delta Force moved on to the next mission without looking back. The unit's operational tempo in Iraq during that period was relentless, with multiple missions per week across a vast and hostile operational area. Basra was catalogued, debriefed, and filed away. Lessons learned were incorporated into training scenarios. Equipment performance was analyzed and any deficiencies noted for future correction. Then the machine rolled forward, because the mission queue never emptied. Somewhere in Iraq or Afghanistan, or half a dozen other countries that would never be publicly acknowledged, someone needed killing or capturing or rescuing, and Delta Force existed to make that happen. The philosophical question underlying the Basra operation remained unresolved and perhaps unresolvable. Does military effectiveness justify unlimited expenditure? Should a democratic society maintain shadowy units that operate beyond normal oversight and accountability? Can tactical brilliance compensate for strategic ambiguity in conflicts where victory conditions remain poorly defined? These questions circulated in academic journals and policy debates, discussed by people who had never fast-roped from a helicopter under fire or carried a wounded man through hostile terrain. The operators themselves had simpler perspectives. They trained to execute missions. When called, they responded. Philosophical considerations were above their pay grade. What remained indisputable was the demonstration of capability. Delta Force had proven once again that it existed in a separate category from even other elite units. The gap between good and exceptional had been measured in Basra and found to be wider than many observers expected. The SAS, one of the most respected special operations forces in the world, had needed rescue. Delta had provided that rescue with an efficiency that bordered on casual. There was no dramatic triumph, no narrow escapes, no desperate heroics. Just professional application of superior resources, training, and firepower to solve a tactical problem. In some ways, the lack of drama was the most impressive element. This was not a miracle. It was routine excellence executed under pressure. The Iraqi insurgency would continue for years after Basra, claiming thousands of lives and consuming billions of dollars. Coalition forces would win tactical victories and lose strategic coherence. Political objectives would shift, public support would erode, and eventually American forces would withdraw, leaving behind a country still fractured by sectarian violence and political dysfunction. In that larger context, one compound raid in Basra meant almost nothing. It changed no strategic calculations, altered no political realities, resolved no fundamental conflicts. It was a tactical footnote, a minor incident in a sprawling war. But for 6 British operators who walked away from that compound alive, it meant everything. They owed their survival to the American unit that appeared from the darkness, killed with methodical precision, and disappeared back into the night. That debt would never be publicly acknowledged, never discussed in official communications or diplomatic exchanges. But it existed, a silent understanding between professionals who operated in the same dangerous world. Delta Force had done what it was built to do, and in doing so, had reminded everyone watching that American military power, when properly focused and unleashed, remained a force without equal on the modern battlefield.